check out the new Thin Green Line podcast, hosted on patreon.com. That's patreon.com. It's a members-only podcast where game wardens John Norris and Wayne Saunders talk about wildlife law enforcement, the outdoors, environmental subjects mixed with current events, and what members want to hear. Join them and become a part of the Thin Green Line. Keep wildlife out of your trash. The Wildlife Trash Safe developed by Presby Steel does just that. It is made of 14-gauge steel, welded construction, and holds a 32-gallon trash can or 10 kitchen bags. It has been black bear tested and was developed in conjunction with the New Hampshire Fish and Game Department. They are lockable, rollable, and they have free delivery in Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont. Call today, 603-752-3022 or presbysteel.com. That's PRESBYSTEEL.com. Keep the wildlife wild and out of your trash with a Wildlife Trash Safe. Guidefitter is the industry network for professional outdoor guides and outfitters, the trusted destination for consumers seeking and sharing guided hunting and fishing experiences of a lifetime, and the enterprise influencer marketing platform for outdoor brands. Guidefitter and its members represent the pulse of the guided hunting and fishing industry. Guidefitter's outdoor partners provide discounts to select types of outdoor professionals, including game wardens, members of the military, guides, outfitters, and other outdoor professionals. Over 145 brand partners and counting. Gear across many categories, including packs, footwear, clothing, flashlights, knives, optics, even firearms and ammo. For more information, go to guidefitter.com/wardenswatch. That's Warden's Watch, all one word. I'm Game Warden Wayne Saunders, and I'm a member of Guidefitter.
We love our children. We protect them. We guide them. We prepare them for life in the world. With all that we do, from deep in our hearts, we cannot control all things. Life-threatening illnesses and disabilities affect far too many of our children each year. While we cannot change the circumstance, we can make dreams come true. Dreams to provide hope, to provide spiritual healing and strength, to provide moments of happiness and relief in the hardest of times. We can give a glimmer of light and hope in a time of darkness and despair. Join huntofalifetime.org to help make dreams come true, to provide hope for children with life-threatening illnesses and disabilities. Hunt of a Lifetime is a non-profit organization fulfilling dreams for hunting and fishing trips to youth 21 and under with life-threatening illnesses and disabilities. Visit huntofalifetime.org to learn how you can make a difference.
This podcast is brought to you by Maine Operation Game Thief and Wildlife Heritage, a foundation of New Hampshire at nhwildlifeheritage.org and International Wildlife Crime Stoppers. Please join me, Game Warden Wayne Saunders, and other game wardens on our adventures protecting wildlife, saving lives, and having fun, all while serving the public and the natural resources of our planet. Listen to the tales and experiences of those who work in the outdoors while being entertained with stories about encounters with poachers, wildlife investigation, murder investigation, near-death experiences, search and rescue missions, wildlife interactions from game wardens around the country and around the world. When I retired, I realized I couldn't let go of that legacy, but rather wanted to share the passion, the commitment, and the stories of those men and women that call themselves game wardens. This is Game Warden Wayne Saunders, and this is Warden's Watch. So Warden's Watch, episode 34, Lieutenant Estes. So, and it's Rick Estes, and for years, and I have a tendency to do this, John, on our episodes. I get names wrong, last names especially. I've called Lieutenant Estes, right. For 20 years, I called him Estes. And on this podcast, he corrects me, Estes. And that was, again, an eye-opener. For 20 years, I called him the wrong name. But just we're talking about woods-wise people. We just got off doing a Thin Green Line podcast with Paul Rella, former state police, about prepping and talking about prepping. And that's going to be on our next Thin Green Line episode. And I think about these woods-wise people, and Lieutenant Estes comes to mind. Still manufactures a fold-out saw. So if you go to his Owl Roost website, you can get this fold-out saw that just folds out. You get a nice little saw blade there. You put it together, and next to a knife, a saw and a hatchet are probably the next thing you're going to want. And to make those woods-wise stuff. And the other thing, we talked about a beeline, which I haven't thought about a beeline forever, but following the bees back and forth, the honey to their really, really interesting to get perspective from one of these guys that has all that woods wisdom. So important right now, to go back to those basics like we talk about on the Thin Green Line with Paul. Back to the basics, back to the woodwise. So
incredibly important, Wayne. And he is one of those, he's kind of one of those lost art kind of guys, right? That we're just losing all the time as we get more urbanized and we get more, processed things delivered to us. And, we don't go out and hunt and gather and survive and build shelters and really read Mother Nature to survive. And now in the advent of COVID-19, all of a sudden this stuff's in vogue again, and everybody's sitting around listening to survival stories and the how-to preppers. Like what a great guy! It just interviewing Paul, and now with Estes coming on and his amazing story, it's going to be good stuff for the listeners. And I know you and I learned a lot from that as well. What a wealth of knowledge he brings to the table, especially in what we're learning today worldwide with this pandemic.
Yeah, and then we're going to learn some more stuff with Lieutenant Estes today. A lot of things of the beginning of the organization. It wasn't the beginning of the New Hampshire Search and Rescue Team, but it was more the organization that he took on and formed that, and that's going to lead into our next episode with another guy that was very influential into bringing the technical side to that, and that's Rick Wilcox. So that'll be probably our next episode. Just kind of building a foundation to move to the next frame so people can get an idea, and then we can go into some of the search and rescue missions that New Hampshire does, because that's one aspect of our job that is very different than a lot of agencies around the country that we're responsible in New Hampshire for search and rescue. We have the White Mountains that are very technical. No trees grow on the top, so we have tree line, and they're small mountains comparatively to most things, but some of the most dangerous mountains in the world. Yeah. And just to form that search and rescue team, that was some of his legacy. Certainly didn't start it, but he started putting it together. You know how that is when you get a group together and you just say, hey, now we need to have some rules, we need to have some expectations, we need to have some goals, and we need to meet those. So just really interesting. I enjoy every podcast, but I enjoyed this one, enjoyed going back and learning about my agency and the formation of this and and the importance of it today.
And I like what you said, Wayne, about what he brings from the standpoint of the search and rescue element for your home state. But what few people realize is, again, wildlife officers, game wardens, conservation officers, nationwide, even worldwide, we wear a lot of different shoes and a lot of different hats, don't we? And most of us are involved in search and rescue on some level, regardless of different technical levels. But we get roped into that. And it's just one of the many game warden jobs that this particular podcast with Lieutenant is going to really highlight how critical that is, as we're so far in the backwoods, we're so far out of reach, that we need to be the guys and the gals to come in and help with, a crazy over the edge, a winter survival catastrophe, the case may be. This is one we haven't discussed yet. And I'm excited to see what he's brought to the table and what our viewers and listeners are going to really get out of it.
And I just found out I've been saying his name wrong for 20 plus years. It's Estes, and I always used to say Estes. After 20 something years getting corrected for that, I'm just kind of blown away, Rick.
Well, I appreciate you making the effort.
And some of these podcasts, his names have been a struggle. I got Mark Rutowski, and I still probably say that wrong, out of Pennsylvania. It's a challenge sometimes, but Estes isn't that much of a challenge. It's just knowing and hearing Estes all the time. I'm sure I heard Estes, but I just I heard more Estes. So that's good that we got this straightened out after 20 years. I always growing up, my relationship with Sergeant Bryant, you were his lieutenant, just always kind of on the periphery of me growing up and you seeing you run situations, and a lot of search and rescue for sure, and just being in and around the Lakes region. And I was always kind of looked up to you too, as I did every game warden in those days, inspiring to be one. So that was pretty cool.
I would dare say that most game wardens had some influence from a former law enforcement officer. I know I did.
And who was that?
Well, I rubbed a lot of elbows with the Bill Hastings and Pete Lyon and Paul Taskers of the world.
Mm-hmm.
Growing up in the Lakes region.
All wardens before your...
Oh, way before my time.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I say
and in your time.
I worked with all of them. Yeah,
yes.
In the long run. Not Paul, not so much. I worked for him for a year or two here in District 2 after I left traineeship down in southern part of the state. I started out down in the Milford area.
Mm-hmm.
And then Steve Erlins retired out of Alton and was able to up there eventually. Another long story, which we won't get into. But it worked out fine. I did not quite enough water for a Lakes Region boy down in Milford, so I needed to get back up here where there was water in the Lakes Region.
Right. So how many years in New Hampshire Fish and Game did you have?
So I got out of the service in 1973, excuse me, and I worked for Wolfboro Police Department for about a year and a half, and then went to work for Fish and Game till 2002. So if you take all my retirement time, it was about 29 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think we all stay on as a deputy for a little while. So and you should be able to count that, I think. So
I would agree.
I did my 30, let's put it that way. So, but after a while, you get over, the shock of not doing the job anymore, and you move on with something else. I started my guiding business about 4 years before I retired, so I would have something that I could.
That was smart.
Well, I don't know how smart it was, but it seemed like a good progression from where I was to the next job, and I'd done that for 20 years, and now I've retired from that. So I've retired twice, actually.
Yeah, but you're right. You mentioned that shock of not being a game warden anymore, and I've experienced it, and I always tell people I felt like I jumped off a cliff and I was waiting to land, and and I was trying to figure out how to land, and at least 4 years prior to, you softened the blow a little by having a plan.
Yeah, I'd love to tell you that it was a brilliant move on my part, but quite frankly, it wasn't. What it was I wanted a drift boat. And I found out that I could get a fairly good discount as a guide on a drift boat. So I said, well, I wrote the test. I ought to be able to pass it. So
right?
I went down and took it.
Well, that's good to know now.
But then since then I became licensed in Maine and New Hampshire, and did about 11 years in the Parmigiani area of Maine, and worked for Bosebuck Mountain Camps for being their head guide for, like I said, 10 or 11 seasons.
Nice, and had a stellar career on that.
Yeah, it was, it and a lot of nice people,
Yes.
It's fly fishermen in general they're in for the whole package, It's not just go there and take a fish home and eat it. It's the entomology. It's all the things that go with fly fishing that make them. They're a little bit more on my scale of what happens in the outdoors.
Right, from the insects to the tying of the flies to the equipment, and then to run a drift boat down a river.
That's learning the hydraulics of rivers is, I guided on the Kennebec over in Maine, and I guided a lot on the Androscoggin. So, yeah.
Nice. And caught some big fish, I'm assuming.
We have on occasion. I mean, things come and go just like everything else, but I think the greatest satisfaction, of course, was up in Parmigiani, where all those fish had never seen a hatchery. It was all wild fish. So
and it's a total different experience with a wild fish compared to a hatchery fish, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And when you hook one, you know it.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's your chances of catching a 3-4 pound brook trout are pretty good up in that country, as you well know about.
Yeah.
Just over that invisible line between Pittsburgh and Lynchtown. It's like a lot of the same things happen up in northern New Hampshire that happened in Parmacini. So
Yeah, no doubt.
But there's a lot of history on all of those places. The Androscoggin, from log drives to all the stuff that ever happened to the Androscoggin is just a lot of history there.
Right. And we used to have camps up there. There's a camp at Hellgate. There used to be a game warden camp.
Absolutely, yep.
And that's because we'd have to go into an area and actually stay because it was so remote in there, and we didn't have modern vehicles to get in and out.
Right.
And we had those planted all around the state at one point.
Yeah, I mean, we you had Blackbrook Camp over on Winnisquam, which was in the springtime. There was a game warden in that camp all spring, and generally several, because we had big smelt runs, and it was...
So we had someone there protecting the resource 24/7 while they were running.
Yeah, I mean, it was a place that you could always find a game. It was like a regional office. There's always somebody there, so...
Yeah, you've seen some changes, that's for sure. I mean, I've even seen some changes like the moose season, from going from the busiest season of my day to now it's probably the slowest season of a game warden season in northern Hampshire. Yeah. But you had the smelt runs of the day, and that was pretty intense as far as harvesting and having smelt, and today our resources aren't what they were.
No, and plus we've started to manage that forage fish base a lot different within the Hampshire Fish and Game Department than we used to. It was, we came to realize that without the smelt, without the forage fish base, that we wouldn't have the fishery that we have in the big lakes.
Right.
And so we eventually started protecting them a little bit more than we did before. But
put in some restrictions on enforcing that, and then paying attention to it on the biology end and trying to promote growth again.
Right.
After we failed.
Well, I don't know that we failed as much as anybody who, my opinion, my view of smelt populations is if somebody tells you they know why they come and go, they're either kidding themselves or they're on some other fantasy, because it's very difficult to understand why those populations crash and why they don't. And, it's...
And you were in the tenure when we actually tried to take some of those from Blackbrook and place them in other ponds and places to increase the smelt populations there.
Yeah. And then came the using the copper sulfate to take care of some of the weed problems in Winnisquam, and just decimated the smelt population.
Right.
It was the end. That was the end of it.
Yeah, and tried to help, we hurt them.
Well, and before we sign up as the we who put that copper sulfate in there, that wasn't the Fish and Game Department.
Okay. Thanks for clarifying that. And the we is, I always think, is a general population type thing. Making those management decisions sometimes, every time we man and tries to do something good, it seems to spin sometimes.
Well, you don't, it's... we don't always know the answers. It's not. We'd love to think it's an exact science, but a lot enters into it. Whether it's chemicals or whether it's weather, there's any number of things that enter into wildlife management that make it very dynamic and, quite frankly, not an exact science.
Yeah. Any smelt cases come to your mind that you guys worked?
Oh my.
I mean, that used to be what my moose season used to be, because you used to have tons of fishermen out there dipping and, so drinking going on. And I hear the stories of smelt fishermen, and then when it started to get restrictions.
Well, and that's, when we were talking before about my exposure to game wardens, that's probably where it started, in Lake Wentworth. I'm born and raised in Wolfboro. There's been an Estes in Wolfboro since the 1600s. I broke the mold. I was the last one to move out and went to Ossipee. Willie Brook was one of those places where there was a great congregation of smelt fishermen. It was quite different than it is today. There was people lined up down the brook. The Lions Club had a little shanty there that on a trailer that they sold hot dogs and coffee. It was quite an episode. And there was always the bull of the brook. He stood up on the bridge there on 109, and nobody got into the brook until the bull of the brook said, "Take 'em, boys." And then they'd all dive in, get their limit or more, and leave. Well, then we found out that you could go on shore and set up a lantern, and that because of the zooplankton that was attracted by the light, it attracted the smelt, and they'd come in, and we started dipping them in the lake, which that's when my father and I would go down and we'd set up the lantern, we'd get our limit, and then we'd leave the lantern, and within a little after midnight usually, 3-4 game wardens would show up, take our nets, dip their limit, and go home.
And take the lantern with them.
No.
Leave it going.
No, we would pack up when they were done, and we'd go home, and that was a nightly ritual every spring. Yeah, Pete, Paul, Jimmy Jones. I can remember Jimmy Jones. God rest his soul. He's long gone now. He was assistant chief of law enforcement in the end. Then he went to the federal government for another 20 years. Anyway, he came. They wanted to bring Jimmy down and show him how to smelt fish, and he was, ice wasn't hardly out. Water temperatures were still in the 30s when this happens. And the lantern started to tip over, and somebody said to Jimmy, "Grab that lantern before it goes in the water." And he moved pretty quickly and filled his waders. And then we had to go get him because the shock of that cold water completely took his breath away,
Oh, man.
We had to fish him out.
And the smelt owner's waders, too.
But anyway, yeah, I mean, I can remember guys with those little turquoise boat-shaped things that you have for kiddie pools, and pulling them out with just chock-a-block full of smelt.
Really? Just kind of sinking them and then bringing them up?
No, they just they'd go fill them up.
Fill them up. Solid with smelt.
Yeah.
Wow. I just can't even picture that.
I mean, I don't know how many quarts you can put in one of those, but way over 4 quarts. Okay.
Right.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Do you think that the pressure we put on it during that time had something to do with the smelt demise?
Like I said, if anybody can explain to you why those populations crash or not, I've never met that person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it's a very if you've got too many, it'll crash.
Right.
Sometimes I've seen that. I mean, over here in Osby Lake, where I live, those smelt, well, Willard Stockbridge, who was a long time gone game warden, he tried to buy it from the guy, but that guy caught a smelt that was 22 inches long. 22-inch smelt that's a good one.
Yeah. I've never even heard of one that big. We get guys over here that catch them trolling, 14, 15-inch smelt. I mean, you just don't find those that size smelt. And smelt fishing in Osby Lake was done from barges. Nope, I don't know any place else in the state where anybody ever fished that way except for Osby Lake. Was it because of the depth? Because I remember the bear camp.
Right. They'd come up the bear camp, and they used nets with 20-foot handles on them, and they got on barges with lights, and they would dip them from the barges. It's the only place I ever knew that to happen.
Right. Pretty neat that they could actually get down there and get up and still have smelt. So there was a bunch of them.
Yeah.
We don't see those in today's.
No, well, I'm not sure if there's anybody that still fishes that way over
on the bear camp.
Yeah.
I remember checking the bear camp several times as a trainee going down there, and I don't remember ever seeing it. We always kept an eye on it, but I don't, like you said, it was such a deep lake, and I heard those stories too, but never really experienced anybody actually doing that.
Yeah.
But I think it might have even been with you, Rick, when we went down there to hear those stories. But But anyways, so almost 30 years in fish and game. You were a sergeant as well?
Yep. Well, I guess if you really want to know how this all started, it was in the 8th grade. My old English teacher, Ernie Bainton, said, okay, I want everybody to write a little paper about what you want to do. Mm-hmm. And that's probably the only A I ever got in English. But right then and there, I said, yeah, I'm going to be a game warden.
Nice.
And if you look at my high school yearbook, it says I wanted to be, and it was just a lifelong thing that I wanted to do. And it was probably because of my indoctrination from
your father, and experience with those guys, mentors, people look up to.
I mean, the big, tall guys with Stetsons, and wow, for a young guy, that's.
I know the impression. It had a lasting impression on me as well.
Yeah. So then I went down to the university for a short period of time until they told me I probably ought to try something different. So that was when they were drafting people into the service for Vietnam, and my draft number was very close to. So I said, well, I'll fool them. So I went and enlisted in the Air Force for 4 years instead of being in the Army for 2 years, and went to the same places. It didn't make any difference. It was not one of my better moves. Yeah. But 4 years of character building. So I got through it. And actually, I ended up in Idaho, the last of me being in the service. And in those days, they would do what they call a project transition. They tried to transition you from being in the military back into civilian life and allow you to work in some profession you think you want to do. And it didn't work out that I could work for the Idaho Fish and Game for whatever reason. So I worked for Boise City and Ada County Sheriff's Department for 6 months before I got out. So I took my test took my written test in Idaho.
For New Hampshire.
Yeah. And
nice.
Came back and interviewed. And I think it was 250 applicants for no positions. And the only 3 guys out of that 250 was Doug Menzies, Ed Canoia, and me were the only people that got hired out of those 250 over a course of however long the register ran in those days. Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't really quick when you came back? Or?
Oh, it was about a year and a half that I worked for. And Wolfboro knew that I told the chief where I was going to go. Mm-hmm. And he was okay with that. He got a year and a half out of me, so he was happy. So.
Yeah, and you get some fundamental police-type skills.
Plus, it was the same retirement system, which, I don't think any of us took this job looking at retirement in the beginning.
Right, but in the end, it's nice.
In the end, it's you've probably passed up a number of opportunities to make more money or spend less time doing it. But there's no better job in the world than being a game warden.
I would totally agree. And that's great to hear from somebody of your tenure and, that same time frame. And hopefully generations to come are going to be saying that same type of thing. So I was just on a podcast myself, and they asked me, hey, if you had to go back 25 years again, what would you do? I'd be a game warden. That's my, when I talk to kids, be a game warden. That's the best job you're ever going to have.
Yeah. So. It's a quote, and I can't do it, but in essence what it is, it's the job that all grown-ups wish they'd done and little boys wish they could.
Yes, and there's a few that do.
And little girls too.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we certainly have some of those which do a great job. Yep. So, but any highlights for your career that you can think? Cases? You were on the dive team?
Yep, I did the dive team for 12 years, I believe. And, all of those, that wasn't quite so gratifying because the save rate on dive team was just zero. I mean, you didn't go there unless you were looking for somebody who passed on.
Yes.
But, you had the opportunity of bringing some closure to some families that wouldn't have gone it any other way, and or would have had to wait, or,
Right.
So there's some gratification there. It doesn't appear, I can't remember many dives where it was like diving in the Caribbean. It was always a nasty place where you couldn't.
Yeah.
And my first drowning, of course, happened to be a kid. And those are the ones you remember. I do anyway. I quite frankly can't remember all the names, but that first one was a young kid who was sliding and with his brothers and cousins or whatever down in Hancock and slid underneath a bridge and into open water, and the current took him right underneath the ice. And that was a tough one.
Yeah, no doubt. I'm curious, was it a runner sled?
Yeah.
And why I ask is we don't see runner sleds. I mean, we see them, but we don't use them like you guys used to use them back in the day. My dad talks about going down roads close by here with a runner sled and smoking like 45 miles an hour because the runner sled, it's all ice, and that's why there was a runner sled in existence, and you could steer it, and then you get back in the pickup and they drive you all the way to the top and you do it again. And I don't think people understand.
Yeah. Well, that's that we did a lot of that, and I think I still have my father's runner sled, but the thing that stuck in my mind there, now we're regressing here, but the thing that struck in my mind there was my aunt and uncle had 6 kids. And they lived down in Cotton Valley, where my father was originally from, in Wolfboro. Mm-hmm. And Cotton Mountain is pretty, about like here, it's a pretty formidable hill. You know? And my uncle was a carpenter, and he made what's called a double runner. And what it was 2 sleds hooked together by a long plank. And you could put 8 people on it.
Wow.
And we would cart that thing up to the top of Cotton Mountain with his 6 kids, and me and my half-sister, and that made the 8, and our cousin Dennis was the pilot. We'd go down through there. With that kind of weight, with that type of hill, you could, the tears would come out of your eyes and run into your ears.
Yeah.
It was quite an episode.
Yeah, it's almost like today's roller coasters is what you guys used to do, sledding, which today's mothers would be cringing even at the thought. And you guys did it on a regular basis, and that was fun.
Oh, yeah.
Because you don't see very many people using the runner sled. You can still buy them, but I've never even seen anybody using them, because when they use them on what we try to slide on, it doesn't work unless it's ice.
And I was born in, when you say Wolfboro Center, you say, oh, right in the center of Wolfboro? Not really. Wolfboro Center's back over here. Yeah. And there was a sawmill, and they had a big old pile of sawdust. And we had the hood from a 49 Ford, and we'd see how many kids would get into that hood and go down off from that.
Oh, man. That's what I love about podcasting. You get into other things of, the runner sled thing. I always find that fascinating when my dad starts talking about that. Yeah. And I don't even know if I want to experience it.
My grandson was here from Michigan, and we broke out the old toboggan, which was my toboggan. So that toboggan's got probably roughly 60 years on it. And we got a pretty good little field here with some slope to it, and he thought that was the
best thing going.
Yeah. He had quite a time.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah. No doubt. That was the next step after the runner sled, the toboggan, because you could actually go on normal snow. Yeah. We're going to have to put some photos up for all these southern people that listen to me.
But you got to embrace this cold weather, otherwise it'll get you down.
Absolutely do. And, we ice fish, we slide, we snowmobile.
Skate.
Were you on when the snowmobiles were just coming in, or was they already here?
No, they'd been here. I think first snowmobile I was ever on, I'll bet you I was 12 or 13 maybe.
Okay.
My father was in the Lions Club. They raffled it off. The guy didn't want it, and he bought it.
Nice.
We used to use it to ice fish on Lake Wentworth.
Yeah.
Yeah, an old snow jet. You don't see those anymore.
No, you don't.
My first sled in Fish and Game was an old 72 Zephyr, which, by today's standards was, my goodness, ride them for 20 minutes, work on them for 2 hours. That's they weren't that dependable.
Even the Skidoos back in the 70s when I started riding, it seemed like we always were working on them. Yeah. Constantly getting that carburetor going and getting it just right to rip around the yard a few times. And don't take it out on the trail because you're going to break down.
We had some episodes with them, that's for sure.
Compared to what we started with and what we have today, just like cars, it's just amazing, the technology, the speed. Somebody showed me an electric snowmobile the other day.
Really?
Yeah. So the electric cars, electric motorcycles they're making an electric snowmobile.
Well, they got propane operated ice augers. I mean, when I was a kid, if you wanted to cut a hole, you had a chisel. You had to pound it out.
You're right. And then we went to the gas augers, and now we got the propane, and they're going to electric now too. And,
they having that hook up to your battery drill.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and a lot later, and just the technology of the sporting and what game wardens are experienced through the ages is kind of neat to see, actually. I mean, I'm kind of glad I was riding the newer snowmobiles rather than the Zephyr.
Yeah, growing up in Wolfboro, because Wolfboro had a village that only existed on the ice. It was actually an incorporated town, Fisherville. When I was a kid, there was a mayor, there was a
it only lasted in the winter, though, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Fisherville.
Yeah.
I wasn't aware of that at all.
Well, you've got to realize that Ralph Carpenter was one of the first executive, well, not director, there wasn't executive director in those days. He was one of the first directors, and he lived in Wolfboro. He actually owned Bondor Island.
Okay.
And had some exotic animals out there that he used to have a caretaker take care of. But, Harry Perkins. Harry Perkins lived next door to us. And Harry was a guide for the state of New Hampshire, and he always had the number 1 badge. And they sent him to all of the sportsman shows down to Boston when guys like Jess Scott, who was a longtime game warden, lived to be 105. From Newport, was originally from Pittsburgh, and he was a guide who would go down there and compete with log rolling and canoe jousting and casting a fly rod for length. And Harry was the king of the hill, and he lived next door to us. He didn't own any land. He lived in the camp between the stone wall and the road in the right-of-way. And he walked with a crutch because my uncle fell down, walking up a hill, fell down with a shotgun and shot him in the back and shortened up one of his legs.
Oh, man. You can't make this up.
And Harry would come to the house every Saturday night for beans because we always had baked beans on Saturday night.
Uh-huh. Well,
Harry, living in that camp, had no running water.
Mm-hmm.
And rather than go someplace where he could take a bath, when his shirt got dirty, he'd just put on another one. And he'd sprinkle himself with oil of anise to cover up the
stench.
The stench. And, my sister couldn't wait for him to get out of the house on a Saturday night so she could get underneath the sink and get the Fuller brush aerosol to spray the house so she could stand it. We're digressing here.
Wow. Yeah, but this is good stuff. Because I'm sure everybody's their nose is curling right up now.
Well, but you know what? I guess, it all kind of distant memories, but it was all the things that contributed to the making of Rick Estes.
Yeah.
You know, I learned to line bees with Harry Perkins. That's what he loved, to line bees and go find, native hives.
Uh-huh.
Well, the way you did that was you would catch a bee and he'd go and you'd let him work on, a piece of honeycomb in a little box, and then you put oil of anise around the edge of the box so that when he went back to the hive, not only did he have the food, but he had the smell. If you understand what bees do, they go out and then they bring back another one. That one goes back. Those two go back. They bring back another one. Eventually,
you can find a line.
Beeline. They will go straight up or go in a circle like a woodcock going up, and then they will go beeline right to the end. So therefore, you had to use a compass.
Mm-hmm.
That was my first indoctrination to wilderness navigation, was beelining. Okay. And so, we used to go find bees, and then we'd smoke them out and put them in a hive and domesticate them. And we didn't buy our bees in those days.
Huh.
Another guy that was a big influence on me once I got into the department was Ken Warren down in Peterborough. He was a great beekeeper. He liked to line bees.
Nope, that's. I think you probably connected a lot of dots for a lot of people in that term beeline. I'm going to beeline to that, and how that created, and and to hear that's pretty good. And the navigation part and the compass, and you actually, when you retired, you actually taught navigation.
Still do, yeah.
Yeah, still do. So, and I remember the first GPSs that you brought to the search and rescue team. They were Silvas, weren't they?
They were, yeah, big old brick.
Yeah.
With a selective availability, or an ability to get you within 95 meters of where you wanted to be, as opposed to today you're talking probably 3 meters of accuracy,
Right.
And we've come a long ways there, which that's a whole nother episode of GPS and maps. We got into those by absolute. I can't explain it. It was a mistake. All the stars were in alignment, but we got into that map tech business.
Right, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to come see you, because I had spoken to Rick Wilcox and I did a podcast with Rick.
Sure.
And how do we start talking about New Hampshire Fish and Game Search and Rescue Team without talking to Rick Estes, who. I did. I'm going to do this. Thank you, Estes. But I've done it for 20-something years, Rick. I'm sorry. Estes. Yes. So, but that's kind of, I wanted to connect the dots for people listening to get, because, when we talk to Rick, we talk about you and the formulation of a team that today is so relevant. So much more, because like we talked earlier, hiking is the one thing that's gaining in outdoor recreation.
Absolutely.
And we're doing search and rescue in the whites, and from navigation. I mean, that's a whole thing, but that's one reason as I wanted to talk to you to bring them into the next podcast, so they can understand where this all began.
Sure. Well, it started way before then. I mean, we had a search and rescue team back with Paul Doherty and Keith Kidder, and
Keith was a big hiker.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Keith worked for me in the end. He moved down to District 2 and was the warden in the Conway area for a number of years. And Keith was my main man when it came to.
Go-to guy.
Go-to guy.
Yeah.
No doubt about it.
Yeah.
Anyway, and, you had Bobby Vashar and Bill Hastings. Bill Hastings was the old man of the mountain, no doubt. You know, he really did a lot with search and rescue. He had that Gorham area. He had no choice.
Yeah, exactly.
But we didn't have the level of search and rescue that we have now in the backcountry. It was a lot more of our focus when I first started was lost hunters.
Mm-hmm.
And if you didn't have during deer season, especially the first part of it when it was really a lot of folks out, if you didn't have 2 or 3 a night every night of the season, you weren't paying attention.
Right.
And the way we did that was, try to go and get a response from somebody and then take
Whether
a compass.
it's shooting 3 shots and getting a response.
Right.
And
take a compass bearing on them, walk in, and then back azimuth back out, and that's what you did every night.
And we had the bull mooses of the day.
That was kind of it worked, but it had the potential of hurting somebody because they'd start to walk to it in the dark, and if they'd had all the implements to get out on their own, they probably would have come out anyway.
Gotcha.
So you didn't want them walking.
Gotcha.
So that's why with the advent of the penetrator, the siren with the loudspeaker, and so you could talk to them and say, don't move, because I'm going to take a bearing on you, and when I get there, I want you to be there,
Right.
And then, of course, over the years, then you got cell phones, and it's just,
it keeps getting better and better and better.
But that was probably our biggest focus as far as search and rescue, although we had a lot more drownings when I first started. I remember one year we had 70 drownings statewide.
Oh my goodness.
For the dive team.
Wow. For a small state like ours, that's substantial.
Huge. But again, not unlike hunter safety, with boating safety, we've cut that down to
life jackets.
If you get 7 drownings per year now, you're probably doing pretty well.
Right.
So, and that's the same way with shootings. I mean, we had a lot of shootings every year, and it appeared that the District 2 had more than their share of fatals. So we ended up making the Red Book that you all use now, so that we had some blueprint that we could use to, investigate these, and everybody knew what their job was and how to do it. And that's that.
Yeah.
That's what precipitated that was stuff that came out of District 2, actually.
Yeah, and that Red Book, I'll tell you, as a trainee and as an officer, came in so handy to grab that and have a blueprint, like you said, to go to a shooting, to know someone's got to go to the hospital, and a line-by-line checklist of what you needed to do.
Yeah.
It was priceless.
And I remember that then Colonel Alley took that to the Northeast Chiefs, and they all worked with it in their own way, in their own states. It's become kind of the gold standard of the way to do it, which that's pretty gratifying stuff.
It should be. It should be. It definitely, and it helped me, and it helps officers today. Yeah. Because, like you said, back then you had a lot of them. There's a lot less now. And because of that, we're not as experienced in it. So grabbing that Red Book and having that blueprint, again, is priceless to know exactly what to do and and the things you forget, because you can go through there and do that checklist. And did I do this? Did I do that? Did I do this? And, it's flawless, which makes an awesome investigation to put together, to bring to the county attorney if you need to, or to vet that stuff out.
Well, I think we did the first case that we always charged people with misdemeanor of shooting a human being, and mistake a game. The first negligent homicide happened all within sight of here, all right over in Tuftonboro, which was a muzzleloader hunter who shot a bow hunter and killed him. And that was the first time that we ever indicted somebody for negligent homicide, and it went all the way through the Supreme Court on 3 different issues, and we prevailed. And that set precedent that we started charging for the negligence of it. That's when we stopped calling them accidents and started calling them incidents. Because they're not accidents. Accidents something you can't control. Incidents something you do because you were negligent or reckless. And so that's and we had, pretty sure we worked with the Red Book on that one, which helped us through all of those court decisions.
Right. And you probably amended your red book some way, somehow.
And it's dynamic. I mean,
right.
all of these, and my background of being in the Air Force and being a crew chief on F-4s, they left nothing to chance. There was a SOP or a manual for everything that you did there. So
right.
Bringing that back to Fish and Game is where that red book came from.
Awesome. Nope, that makes total sense. Our paramilitary comes from your generation.
Yeah. Well,
it's true,
yeah.
and I think it's good. It gives us structure, and I know even today we like guys that have been in the military because they have structure. Sure. They understand a lot more. They have navigation skills usually because they've been trained in that. So it's definitely a good thing to have in your pocket, so to speak.
No doubt.
So that gave you into the search and rescue team because...
the search and rescue team, let's see. I'd love to tell you this was all the brainchild of my generation, but there were people who were doing search and rescue, not to the magnitude that we do it now, or to the level that we do it now, but they were doing it way before me. So give the devil his due,
Right.
Put the honor on the right people here. What happened with me was I was sitting in my office as a lieutenant in District 2, and we shared a regional office with District 3, and an officer by the name of Craig Jewett, who was the sergeant over there, came to me one day and he said, I went to a rescue and we all sat in the parking lot, all the volunteers went up, and I was embarrassed. What are we going to do about this? And I said, well, I would agree that, we've kind of got off our mission here. Not that, believe me, as far as search and rescue goes, and should it be with Fish and Game, do I believe it? Yes, because I don't know anybody else that has that knowledge or that equipment to do it.
Right.
Are we being funded for it? To me, it's an unfunded mandate as far as I'm concerned that the state put us in that position and doesn't pay for it. But that's a whole nother podcast, okay?
No doubt.
So anyway, I went to Colonel Alley, and having been in the service, I should have known this is a mistake.
I can see where this is going as a former lieutenant myself.
And I said, there's some concern out there that we're not. We're not. I don't know that I said that we weren't doing our fair share as much as we weren't living up to our responsibilities. And he said, "Great, then you do it." And that was the beginning of that. Because quite frankly, I can remember my first search and rescue, which was in Nottingham, and my lieutenant was in charge of it. We had maybe 500 rescuers or searchers for a big search for an old guy that came up missing. And he had got called away on an emergency and said, there you go. And it was like, oh my goodness. You go right into cold sweat and everybody wants to tell you how to do your job. And everybody thinks, you sat there and fiddled around with your papers. I think we've been, the lieutenants and search managers have been labeled as, what is it, markers or?
Highlighters.
Highlighters, there you go, yeah.
That's because we take those nice colored highlighters and we highlight maps. And there's
a little bit more to it.
There's a little bit more to it. But
there's a whole lot more stress to that, So anyway. It wasn't my first love. When he said, you do it, I said, oh man, what have I got into here? I should know better, but hey. So we started, it became starkly apparent that, I don't remember how many officers we had then, whether we had 45 or 50 at the height. Not everybody had the predisposed need to go climb mountains, I mean, that's not why we took the job. We took the job to be game wardens. But there were some that, liked to do it or didn't mind doing it. I'm not sure which one of those terms you want to use.
Right, exactly.
So I said, well, what if we just equip a certain amount of people, educate a certain amount of people, and make them those people we go to for the long-term ones or for the above tree line ones where, as a search manager, your first responsibility, my perspective, is to your searchers. You don't want to put people in a situation where they're going to get hurt.
Mm-hmm.
Because if they get hurt, then the victim who got himself into this position in the first place is in real trouble now.
Right.
So, anyway, we set up the search and rescue team. I think we started with 12. And, yes, a lot of stars came into alignment because it was when GPS first came out. So we got into GPS. There was a company down in Greenland by the name of Earth Visions who have now become my topo and owned by Trimble, which is a big mapping company.
Mm-hmm.
But they were just getting started with some maps that you could have on a CD disc and plug into a computer and have all of these USGS maps. And like I like to tell my students, what we used to do when we had a search, we'd go and get one map and we'd make photocopies of it in black and white. And quite frankly, the 5 colors of a USGS map tell the story.
Actually means something.
you just took it all away. You made it in 2 colors.
Yeah.
So we needed to have, again, not unlike everything else, we wanted everybody walking the same walk and talking the same talk. And the only way we could do that is if we give them all the same map,
mm-hmm.
all the same education, and that's what we did. And it blossomed. I mean, I don't think they got many more than 12 on that team. We held it at that.
Right.
And but we got into this map program with Earth Visions and we were able to guide it in a direction so that it was very useful for search and rescue.
Mm-hmm.
It also became very useful for forest fires and other things.
Right.
But believe me, the fact that it still has 2 coordinate systems and you can do this and that with it is because we got on the ground floor. I think what they were looking for was the most computer illiterate individual they could find, and to do what they call
experiment with them,
to do what they call beta testing, and I was a perfect example of that. I had no idea about computers. Okay, and so that's 2 things that came along about the time we started the search and rescue team. And quite frankly, it made a difference. I mean, the way we used to do searches was all of a sudden now people come in with a GPS, download it, you know exactly where they've been, so there's no holes. Mm-hmm. There's a whole lot of things that happened there all at once that made this team.
Right. And there was a learning curve for the officers as well as the managers. And one of my favorite stories, Rick, about the beginning of this team is the rock you threw out of the helicopter.
Yeah. Which not everybody knows that whole story.
Oh, okay. Well, let's hear it from your view because I've heard it from some of the people looking for the rock.
Well, so we had a pretty good relationship with the avionics side of state police through Francis Lord, who local boy here that we all knew and grew up with, and Francis was a helicopter pilot, and I said, okay, well, these guys are getting pretty good with this GPS stuff,
mm-hmm.
but it was still in the place where we had a selective availability or an accuracy of 95 meters, which is, 95 meters is more like a football field.
Yep.
The other thing that entered into that scenario was that the Olympics were going on at the same time. And the Department of Defense controlled the selective availability.
Okay.
And it didn't have to be 95 meters. It could be as much as they wanted it to be.
Mm-hmm.
And still can, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
Don't get carried away with this 3 meters, because if there's a real fracas, they will scramble that so that it is not that accurate.
Right.
So that was in play. So I gave him a rock with some fluorescent tape on it and sent him up around Sawyer Pond and said, drop that out and give me some good coordinates. Well, good coordinates to a pilot and good coordinates to a person on the ground is two very different things. Because when you're in a plane, you can see a long way. So if you get, within a
little elevation,
within a quarter of a mile of accuracy, you're doing all right. Well, then I found out in the long run that he did it without hovering and just tossed it out and then looked at his and marked it. And, so it wasn't completely accurate, and
never was found.
Well, I got one at my retirement party that was supposed to be it, but I don't think it was. It looks similar, but I don't think it was the same one. It was, that was not one of my finer moments. On the other hand, we learned a lot, about
selective availability.
And so.
And that's what it was about during that time.
Absolutely. No, I certainly was I was certainly no mountaineer. I mean, I did my share of walking up hills. Believe me, I used to get in trouble pretty regularly with the office because they wanted the supervisor to be in touch with them. And I had this real problem sitting while my guys were doing something, so I would go with them, and then I'd get in trouble with the office because they couldn't get a hold of me, or I couldn't get answers to them fast enough. And that's kind of secondary, but if you think about it, that's the reason that we did the search and rescue team, because it is our responsibility. So therefore, it made sense to me that I had to have somebody with each one of those groups that I knew was doing that job because they understood that it was their responsibility. So that's when we became part of their team, and they became part of our team, and that's team building. Okay,
right.
That's.
Is that kind of where Rick Wilcox comes into this?
Well, yeah. I mean, Rick Wilcox was always the president of the Mountain Rescue Service, and Mountain Rescue Service probably suffered the worst loss of all of us through Albert Dow in an avalanche situation on Mount Washington, and they became the folks who you'd want to go above tree line or hang off a string on some cliff someplace. And they were made up of certified mountain guides through the American Mountain Guides Association. So you could have some trust that they knew what they were doing, okay? But even at that, it's not their responsibility.
No, I totally agree.
It's ours. So we needed to have somebody there accountable, okay? I guess the bottom line for me was, okay, so we go and you do a search and rescue. It's the Fish and Game Department's responsibility. You're in charge, so I'm boiling this down. You're in charge, so your responsibility. And if something happened, if somebody got hurt, and we were taken to task for it, it wasn't adequate for me to say, well, I sent Rick Wilcox up there, and this is what happened.
Right. No. You can't do that.
It's not Rick Wilcox's responsibility. It's Rick Estes' responsibility. So I need to know that I sent Wayne Saunders up there with them, who is my emissary and who is going to call back when things get in trouble. Again, that's the premise that we worked on here, that we needed to be on scene. We needed to have some people who could do this. And boiled into was a working relationship that you don't see anyplace else in the United States. It just didn't happen that way.
Right.
Like it happens here.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree.
Those volunteers are invaluable. We couldn't do this without them.
No.
The 45, 44, whatever it is, number of wardens, when you start talking about a search of 500, and we've all had those,
Mm-hmm.
where you have a kid lost, they come out of the woodwork.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to know what incident command system's all about and how you're going to run this.
Right.
And it's a big responsibility. Lives are at stake.
Yep. I think in the McCarthy case where we had buses,
Absolutely.
carting people around, searchers, and
absolutely.
Yeah, hundreds
Absolutely.
and hundreds and hundreds of searchers.
The one that comes to mind is, and again, I remember the kids' names. I don't remember the grown-ups' names. I don't know why. It's just the way it is.
Mm-hmm.
But Cameron Papetry up there in Berlin, when he came up missing, and the mill was still running, and the people running the mill went to all of the workers and said, you can stay here and work, or you can go look for Cameron. And 500 of those people walked out of that mill.
I was going to say.
And they showed up on their doorstep saying, what do you want us to do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of organization, a lot of management.
Yep. And so, and again, you get those 500 people and you don't know.
Mm-hmm.
You have no idea their capabilities, what their physical abilities are.
Mm-hmm.
So again, now we'll get into this volunteer system where, Avsar, if you come to me and you say, I got this many people, I'm not looking for numbers. I want to know that that number of people know what they're doing and they're going to be okay.
Right. Yep, and that's where the creation of the search and rescue teams came from. The
that's
volunteers.
How that all worked out. And these volunteers had this mantra that, the reason we're doing this is not because we get paid, because they get paid nothing.
Mm-hmm.
They may be doing it for the glory, but I don't think so.
Yeah, and is Cameron? That's the iconic picture of Cameron on Bob Bryant's shoulder, coming down, all smiles.
You might not want to bring that one up because that one is, it's got a little bizarre side to it. It went on for, I think Marty Garabedian was lieutenant up there then, and he worked it for an afternoon and an evening with his own people, and this young kid just walked away in back of Berlin, over on the west side, and consequently, the search and rescue team got called in there, and we needed some other people. Not that Bob was on the search and rescue team, but we needed some other people, so I brought my sergeant with me.
Mm-hmm. They can be useful.
They can. Sometimes. Actually, I think probably Bob's found more people for me than any one particular person that ever worked for me.
Wow.
He just has that karma.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, he had a GPS of his own, an old Garmin 62, which if you can find one now, you probably got to hang on to it because it's a collector's item, I think.
Huh.
Problem being is he didn't have a great deal of knowledge how to run it. And that's okay. He was not on the team, so wasn't expected to, it's just, he was just there. And he came to me and he said, hey, the guy here from DOT that has a woman who works for him who knows where this kid is. I said, what are we doing? Well,
get her up here.
Yeah, she did it by dowsing.
And that's like the stick?
Well, actually, she used wires, but yeah.
Like dowsing for water.
Yeah. I guess they were driving down the street, and it was all over the news, and she said to her supervisor, "Sir, I could find that guy. Give me a map, and I can tell you where he is, where that kid is." So the guy went and got a topo map and said, "Yeah, show me this." And she did her little thing with the wires and put an X on the map and said, "It's right there." So I'm getting this from Bob. I said, "Yeah, where's this DOT guy?" Yeah, bring him over here. So he said, "Yeah." Now, I've used clairvoyance on a couple of occasions, and my attitude is I'll do anything to bring this to an end. I don't care what have I got to lose?
Right. It's more information. It's a possibility.
And in the whole makeup of a search, it was where we were going. Mm-hmm. So to have somebody go through there and mark a baseline, do a hasty search, give me an idea of what kind of consequently where he was going. If you wanted to fall down, you had to cut the trees down to fall down. Otherwise, you'd never fall down. It was too thick, Mm-hmm. So I set up his GPS and gave him a compass bearer, and I said, you just go till that thing tells you you're there. And he walked in there with the guy from DOT and was pawing his way through this jungle of whips that had been cut, not too long ago, and came into this place where there was a big rock, and there was Cameron sitting on a rock.
Wow.
And she was good selective availability. I would say she was within a couple 100 yards of where she had that access where that kid was.
Wow. That's pretty interesting. Did that continue on? Did you ever use that again, or? I can tell you her name today, who she is, but I've never seen her since. Really?
Yeah. We had another one that was all about water from the lakes region. Mm-hmm. She would come periodically. I never sought them out. You don't have to. You've been a lieutenant.
Right.
If this goes on for more than a day or two, they're going to start coming out of the woodwork. Mm-hmm. Not necessarily all clairvoyants, as much as people who think they know where this kid is.
Right.
Because I've lived here all my life, and I know where he is. Mm-hmm. You need to go here. But on occasion, you get somebody who says, I've seen it in the dream, Mm-hmm. And so, again, what do you do? I mean, I suppose you could laugh it off and say, yeah, great, thank you. Thank you for your input, and move on. On the other hand, what do you got to lose?
Right.
Stranger things have happened in this world, and have somebody have an apparition or epiphany of where something's located. Mm-hmm. And quite frankly, I've doused water all my life.
And it works.
This is the first artesian well I've ever had. Mm-hmm. I've always had dug wells, and that's how we found them, with a fork and stick.
And they're still sought after, those people.
Oh, there's books about it.
Yeah, no doubt.
But
that lady in the Lakes region, was she the dreamer that's had the dream, or
yeah, she was more about water. She's more about water. Now she just
was she successful?
Oh yeah,
she was.
Yeah, the first time it ever happened to me was, I don't know if I remember right or not, but we had a dam that went out in Alton and washed a big hole in the road and a whole bunch of debris. Well, in the process, took this woman who was trying to get away from it in a truck and swept her away. And we were en route 140 at the fire station there, Central Fire Station in Alton. And we'd set up a command post. And we were working a lot of incident command there, because you had a lot of different situations, from propane tanks floating around in the Merrimeeting River to, lost woman. Mm-hmm. And I guess I won't use any names this time, but because I don't want to embarrass anybody. But one of the officers who was on the dive team came across the bridge, and the woman stopped him, and she said, "You see that basketball?" And the top of the Merrimeeting River was just nothing but debris, from lawn chairs to propane tanks, basketballs, you name it, it was all there from the side of that hill. When that dam let go, it brought everything down, including her. And she stopped him going across the bridge, and we couldn't dive because there was no surface. It was all debris. So she said, "You see that basketball right there?" And he said, "Yeah." She's right underneath that basketball in the river. He didn't say anything. He just passed it off.
Yeah.
And we had the helicopter. Francis was surveying that debris to see if he could see this woman amongst all this.
Right.
It was devastation.
Getting that bird's eye view.
And I noticed that when he did that, all of that stuff shifted from the prop wash.
Mm-hmm.
I said, cool, we'll do this half of the time. So, Francis, can you go over there and just drive all that stuff over onto the west shore, and we'll put somebody in on the east shore, and we'll do our normal dive thing. And at the time, we had top to bottom communication. It was just coming on. And the guy who met this woman on the bridge was manning the earphones to the diver. And so they got in the water. They were doing a search over there, and all of a sudden the guy on the bottom says, I've got her. And the guy who talked to the woman on the bridge looked up, and she was looking him right in the eye and said, that's where she is. And she couldn't hear it. And the hackles went up on his neck, of course, because he's going, oh, this is far too bizarre for me.
Yeah.
And she nailed it.
Wow.
And she did one other one for me that was up off Cattle Landing, and I took her out in the boat. You're the supervisor. You've got the dive team there that have their own supervisor, and they've been there for 2 days, and they looked everywhere, and we're just getting ready to say, it was one of those deals where the boat showed up, and where is he? And 44,000 acres of water.
Mm-hmm.
And she shows up, and she says, if you'll take me out, I'll show you where he is.
With that much, that's where it is.
So I took her out, and she said he's right there. And I looked at we've set up buoys when we do that, so we know where we've been and where we're going.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a little hole. We hadn't been there. Now I got to go back and convince the dive master that we need to go out and do one more. Why?
Yeah, that's quite a talk, huh?
Just cause. And they went out, dropped the anchor, went down the anchor, and there it was.
Wow.
So it happens.
Yes.
Do I think that you need to hire somebody that does that on a consistent basis? Sure, I'd do that.
Yeah. Because I'm sure as much success there was, there's been unsuccesses too.
You've had them that, if you remember, we had a big Learjet thing over in Lebanon that we looked for like ever, and we were getting an extraordinary amount of pressure to find these guys from a guy who was next door neighbors to Steve McQueen or something. I don't know. Anyway, it was coming hard from the governor's office, so we need to go find this guy, and he did this plane with two people in it. We just didn't have enough to go on. I mean, we worked it and worked it and worked it.
Like a needle in the haystack.
Right. And that was one where Clairvoyant came, and we flew her. It was a different one, and we flew her and that didn't work.
Yeah.
And it was 3, 4 years, 5 years before some forester walked across that plane wreck.
Yep. You needed to get that lady from Berlin up in the plane.
Yeah. Anyway, those things happen, and it makes for good stories. And
absolutely, great podcast.
I'm not big on fabrication, so I got to tell you, some things are stranger than fiction. But.
No doubt about it. But certainly good to pass that along, and it's a resource. Let's face it, it's a resource that you can't really ignore.
Again, what you got to look at what your goal is. What your goal is to find somebody or get somebody out, I've used, God rest his soul, Brian Abrams found out we had a Channel 9 helicopter oozing around Mount Scarrow one day, and said, it's going to be a lot easier to take this guy up and pick him up with that helicopter. A little bit of a liability using a civilian, helicopter, but we did it, and we got him off, and then that was.
And Channel 9 had a scoop,
and they had firsthand knowledge about that one. They filmed it. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
So
awesome.
And I would hate to say that leave the impression that we fly by the seat of our pants, and it it's from my perspective, it's very sophisticated anymore when we do search and rescue.
I would agree.
And now with the advent of winter mountaineering, that the fellas that I talked about earlier that started this off a whole long time ago, they never had that magnitude of winter work.
Right.
They were busy doing fish and game work, and it wasn't there to do. But we've been saddled with it. It's our responsibility. And, we'd like to have the state pay for it a little bit more. On the other hand, we still got to do it.
Right.
And I once had another lieutenant say, this is ridiculous. We shouldn't be doing this. And I said, okay. And I was doing the paperwork. I was tracking this. And what I found out was that about, even me, who I went to all of them, it was only about 6% of my time. And what I said to that lieutenant was, if I can give 6% of my time to do something that I disdain and really brings me into a cold sweat, for 4% of doing what I love to do, I'll make that trade any day of the week.
Yep, I would agree with that. But I think it's more than 6% now.
I'd be surprised.
You would be?
Yeah.
You think it's still about 6%?
I would be surprised if the average warden in the state of New Hampshire does more than 6% of his time in search and rescue. Are there areas that do more than others that are saddled with it? Absolutely. On the other hand, my nearest brush with death was on Mount Monadnock, not Mount Washington or Mount Chicago or some, Arctic situation. When I was a trainee down there, I thought I was going to die.
In a winter situation?
In a winter situation.
The most hiked mountain in the eastern seaboard.
And I had denim boots, and nobody issued me a pack. Good thing was that EMS was based in Peterborough, so I went and bought a pack at the behest of Kenny Warren, and we went up there with an EMT that had low quarter shoes on. We got up there, and there was a problem because all the trails on Mount Monadnock were painted on the rocks.
And it was covered.
So what we had to do was we'd go up there and we'd go as far as we knew where we were and then send out other people and they'd brush it off and we'd go to that point. And that's how we get up there. And the guy was passed on a long time before we got up there, not because we were crawling our way up there, but because he was dead when his partners left him. And we had a state trooper with us who was a very large man. And with Ben, and I think Ben is still down there as the park manager, he's the only guy that had an ice axe. So now we got to come down all of this stuff. Ben would slide down a ledge, self-arrest with the ice axe. He would catch the next guy. That guy would catch the next guy. That guy would catch the next guy. Rick came down, and then came the trooper.
Wow. And everybody caught him.
I was about 2 inches tall by the time I got off there after catching him.
Wow.
He came down there with a great deal of terminal speed, believe me. And we just weren't equipped. We just didn't have, and so, again, in the making of, the constant making of Rick Estes, that was another life lesson that told me, if you're going to, when I'm saddled with this idea of having a team, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to tell you right now, they are going to be equipped. They're going to have everything they need to do this with, or I'm not doing it.
Right.
I think
no matter what the cost.
I think the first year that we did that, I spent $21,000, which was big money, $21,000 on equipment alone.
Wow. And the constant upgrade and the use.
And it's always something new coming along.
Always, new and better. That makes your job easier. And,
sure.
Life-saving.
Yep.
The jet boils the guys carry now, all that stuff.
Well, look at this side scan sonar.
Yes.
What a boon.
Yeah, and the things we're finding with it.
Yeah. I mean, it's unbelievable.
No doubt.
So, I think my greatest satisfaction out of being the team leader for the Specialized Search and Rescue Team in New Hampshire is in all the years that I did it, I had 2 injuries to my rescuers. One of them was a stick through the leg, and the other guy was a firefighter from a local fire department who blew a knee, and we had to lug him down. Other than that,
it's a pretty good record.
So
and I think overall we have a very good record.
Absolutely. You never hear of, you do around the United States. I mean, you go up in a helicopter and anything could happen to you, and it would be a bunch of people all at once.
Right. But I think because you have those specialized search and rescue, like the Androscoggin Valley Search and Rescue Team,
Absolutely.
MRS, the PEMI, they train their people, they make sure they're trained, and then we use these specialized volunteer groups. Like you said, nowhere else does that occur to the level that it has to occur in the White Mountains of New Hampshire.
Absolutely.
It's astronomical, and that's pretty awesome. And I really appreciate you sitting down with me, learning a little more about Rick Estes. and your experience as a game warden, and bringing that into the search and rescue, and developing that team to what it is today, Rick. And I think others have grabbed that ball and continued in that thing. But it's great that was organized.
Yep.
And
it's never been lesser since we started it. It's always been more.
Yes. Oh, that's great. Thank you very much for sitting down and having a chat with me.
You bet.
Please join me, Game Warden Wayne Saunders, and other game wardens on our adventures protecting wildlife, saving lives, and having fun, all while serving the public and the natural resources of our planet. Listen to the tales and experiences of those who work in the outdoors while being entertained with stories about encounters with poachers, wildlife investigation, murder investigation, near-death experiences, search and rescue missions, wildlife interactions from game wardens around the country and around the world. When I retired, I realized I couldn't let go of that legacy, but rather wanted to share the passion, the commitment, and the stories of those men and women that call themselves game wardens. This is Game Warden Wayne Saunders, and this is Warden's Watch.